stories.
Your freedom.
The Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome, everybody. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. Back in the Connecticut studio, back from my week abroad in Southern California. Thanks to Tom Woods for stepping up and hosting the show on Thursday. We ended up having to go with the best of show on Friday, a little bit under the weather. I've been talking quite a bit. Lots of meetings. Not only did I have the two events at UCLA and UC Irvine, but I did presentations constantly throughout the week for money managers and hedge funds, and so basically giving little private seminars. So it really takes a toll. Anyway, I am back in the office now. We got a full week. I'm actually going to be heading into the city later on today. I'm taping the Judge Napolitano show, Freedom Watch, on Fox Business. So those of you who watch that show can tune in later today and get more of Peter Schiff. Of course, if you don't watch the Judge's show, you really should. It's a good show. A lot of good guests in addition to me. Anyway, not too much going on in the market today, although we had pretty big volatility on Thursday and Friday as the events were unfolding in Europe, particularly with related to Italy and Italian yields, and ultimately Italy deciding to approve an austerity measure that sent some confidence back into European stocks, European bonds, and the euro currency. Today, the euro currency trading down, though, down back below 136. It was above 137 on Friday. The only currency that's really up today is the Japanese yen. Gold pulling back a little bit, as is crude oil. But crude oil, again, over $98 a barrel. It got as high as $99 earlier this morning or late last night. Oil prices continue to rise, acting much, much stronger than the overall market. The only thing that causes oil prices to sell off is a sell-off in the stock market. But as soon as the sell-off ends, oil prices come right back up. And in fact, seasonally, this is normally when you'll see gasoline prices weakening. Instead, they're actually rising. So I think from a seasonally adjusted basis, I think pump prices right now are at record highs for this time of year. It's not a record high because they were higher at one point. I think one summer, 2008 maybe, was higher. But this is not the summer. But based on what I'm looking at in these charts, I think that by summer 2012, we are going to have all-time high pump prices for gasoline. Of course, that's going to be right in the heart of the election season because the election, of course, comes in November of 2012. And if we're looking at record high oil prices in July and August of an election year, that could be a big issue. Inflation, the higher cost of living, which, of course, everybody seems to be ignoring right now. But it is a growing threat, and it will be a much larger threat by the time the 2012 elections roll around. Now, talking about the 2012 elections, I happened to watch on Saturday night the CBS foreign policy debate. And, of course, we actually had a real chance to debate foreign policy. After all, you got Ron Paul there, whose view on foreign policy is very much outside the mainstream Republican Party rank-and-file view. So it should have been a very good opportunity to have a real debate on foreign policy. Of course, the problem was there was no debate because Ron Paul really wasn't allowed to speak. And I'm not just making this stuff up. I mean, I watched this debate, and it wasn't until like halfway through the debate that Ron Paul even got a question. And it wasn't even a real question. It was a follow-up. Because when you had a direct question, you got a minute to respond. And when you had a follow-up, you had 30 seconds. So Ron Paul didn't even get a question until it was a follow-up. And, of course, the Ron Paul campaign actually complained, rightly so, after the fact, that their candidate only got 90 seconds of airtime. In fact, I think they said it was 89 seconds. Maybe they were a second under. 89 seconds, which is really a disgrace. And, you know, if you think about Ron Paul is one of only two veterans on that stage, the other one being Rick Perry. He is on the House Foreign Relations Committee. So that's probably more foreign policy experience right there than anybody else on that stage. He also has received more donations from the military than everybody else on that stage combined. So obviously, if the troops support Ron Paul, then maybe Ron Paul knows something about foreign policy. If, after all, the people who are most impacted by our foreign policy, the people who are on the front lines, who are putting it all on the line, their lives on the line for foreign policy, if they're the ones that are voting with their pocketbooks and supporting Ron Paul, obviously Ron Paul has something to say when it comes to foreign policy, but not according to CBS. Let me actually give you the numbers. This is per question. All right, here, Rick Perry got the most. All right, Rick Perry actually is, polling well below Ron Paul at this point. But anyway, Rick Perry got 5 questions and 2 follow-ups. So he got 7 questions. 7 questions. That was number 1. Coming in number 2, Newt Gingrich, who is now, I guess, the flavor of the month in the media, he got 5 questions and 1 follow-up. He's tied for second place with Herman Cain, who got 5 questions and 1 follow-up. Right, so 6 questions for Cain, 6 questions for Gingrich, 7 questions for Perry. Now, what about Mitt Romney? Well, he only got 4 questions and 1 follow-up, so he got 5. Right, but those are the top tier. Now let's go down. Look at Rick Santorum. He got 3 questions and 2 follow-up. 5 questions for somebody who barely even registers in the polls. Michelle Bachmann, 3 questions. Now, Michelle Bachmann is also complaining that she didn't get enough questions, but she got 3. But anyway, and John Huntsman, 2 questions and 1 follow-up, so he got 3. How many did Ron Paul get? 1 question and 1 follow-up. So he got 2, right? Nobody else got fewer than 3 questions, and in fact, the only candidate that got only 1 direct question was Ron Paul. John Huntsman got 2 direct questions. Michelle Bachmann, 3 times. Rick Santorum, 3 times as many direct questions as Ron Paul, despite the fact that Ron Paul is, polling 5 times as well as Rick Santorum. So obviously this was a deliberate attempt on the part of CBS to silence Ron Paul, to not allow him to have a voice. Because what is CBS afraid of? That maybe as some of their audience, and CBS is a pretty liberal network, that maybe some of their audience would listen to Ron Paul and be attracted to his message, and maybe they would vote Ron Paul. Maybe they want to display the Republican Party as monolithic when it comes to foreign policy issues, because they're afraid that maybe some of the Democrats just might prefer a sensible foreign policy coming from Congressman Ron Paul, and so they decided to keep a lid on what the congressman had to say. Anyway, we will be back. We got more of the Peter Schiff Show coming up after the break here at SchiffRadio.com. Stick around. Back on the air. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. We're taking calls 855-4-SCHIFF, 855-4-SCHIFF. It's a good time to call. We don't have a guest until the top of the second hour, so plenty of time to take your calls. If you want to call in now, there are open lines, 855-4-SCHIFF. Before the break, we were talking about this CBS foreign policy debate, of course, debate in quotes there, on CBS on Saturday evening. According to CBS, the reason that Michelle Bachmann received only 3 questions, their excuse there was that, they were basing the questions on the polling, where people were in the polls. So since she wasn't polling very high, she didn't get a lot of questions. Now, first of all, why would they even do that? If it's supposed to be fair, wouldn't you give everybody an equal opportunity to speak? After all, the debates seem to be very influential on the polls themselves. So if people are low in the polls, and therefore you don't give them many questions, they don't have an opportunity to rise in the polls. Why not? Don't even look at the polls. Once you've decided to include people in the debate, make it fair. Give everybody the same number of questions, regardless of where they are in the polls, and let's see what happens. Let the voters hear from the candidate. In fact, you can argue that it's more important to give the people who are lower in the polls more questions, if you're going to do it at all, because these are the ones that need to, voters don't know about them as much. So it would be more helpful in the process if some of the people who were lower in the polls got to speak, because maybe if they spoke and people like what they heard, they might have the opportunity to rise in the polls. But of course, CBS is lying, because that's obviously not the reason. Because number one, Rick Perry got the most questions of anybody. Rick Perry is actually pretty low in the polls right now. In fact, he's lower than Ron Paul and so why is he getting the most number of questions? Now, maybe CBS wanted to ask him a bunch of questions because they were hoping he would screw one up and they would get a good soundbite, like on the CNBC debate where he forgot the name of the Department of Energy. So maybe they were hoping if they threw enough questions towards Rick Perry that he'd have another, mental freeze. And, so maybe that's why they did that. But what is the explanation? If they were really going by polls, how do you give John Huntsman, how do you give Rick Santorum more questions than Ron Paul, when Ron Paul is polling way ahead of either Santorum or Huntsman or Bachmann, for that matter? I mean, she's claiming that she didn't get enough questions when she got 3 times as many direct questions as Ron Paul, and in total questions, she got twice as many as Ron Paul. Or no, Ron Paul got 2, she got 3. All right, so 50% more questions, even though Ron Paul is clearly polling ahead of Michelle Bachmann. So, I mean, they got egg all over their face there at CBS, but apparently nobody really cares. Now, I forgot to give you my opinion on the overall debates, but I thought that this would have been an opportunity for Ron Paul to have picked up some support. Unfortunately, he didn't get to really contrast his views as much as I would have liked. There were some questions, too, that I think it would have been great if they actually asked Ron Paul about it. But they didn't. Even though they knew that Ron Paul would have a different opinion, and they kept asking people the same questions who were basically coming up with the same answer, rather than letting somebody throw a real debate into the debate. I did think, though, however, that Rick Perry handled himself pretty well this time. I mean, I'm not really talking about what he said or didn't say, but I think as far as the debates I've seen him in, I think he did well as far as just overall performance on how he presented himself. I think maybe it was his best debate, which I think is probably something he needed. I mean, he was really down in the ditch and needed to come out, with a good performance this time around, given what happened in the CNBC debate, where he could not remember the name of the Department of Energy. The question is, though, why did he not know the name? I mean, is it simply because he had, he was just memorizing the departments, that he had no real input into the departments that he wanted to eliminate, and therefore he couldn't remember the Department of Energy? I mean, that's what your first impression would be. Well, he doesn't know it because he just forgot it. And obviously, if he had come up with his plans on his own, how could he forget the Department of Energy? I mean, my thinking is it's got to be beyond that, because, hey, the guy's from Texas. I mean, how could he forget about energy in an energy state? In fact, there are a lot. I think he just totally drew a blank, and he just froze up under the pressure of a debate where he knew that he was under some pressure based on some poor performances in the past. But in any event, I think he had a pretty good showing. We'll see what it does in the polls following the debate that we just had. I think that Perry. I mean, people were pretty much writing Perry out after the CNBC debate, like it was no way. And so to me, it looked like, well, maybe if he were a stock, I'd have bought him, because I think he's in for a bounce, because he really, really got clobbered. And he might get even a little bit of a sympathy bounce. So many people piling on him that he could pick up a sympathetic vote. Also, of course, Herman Cain is managing to hold in there despite all of these allegations that keep coming up against Herman Cain. He continues to poll pretty well. On the debate, I don't think it was one of his better debate performances this time around. But anyway, let me go to the phone, see if anybody else has any opinions on either of these debates, because, of course, I haven't even been on the show. I think Tom Woods hosted the day after the CNBC debate, and so we've had 2 presidential debates since the last time I had this microphone. Anyway, on hold is Herman calling from Queens, New York. Herman, welcome to the show.
Yes, hello, Peter. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right, then. I have 3 questions. My first question is, Of the tip of the iceberg of what you call it, the national debt that's always spoken about, the 14, 15 trillion, how much actually comes due? How much of that actually comes due within 2012?
Well, I've heard the statistic that about 40% of the debt matures in about a year. So you have a big percentage of that debt that is very, very short term. So if you figure the national debt is $15 trillion, 40% of that is about $6 trillion dollars. That's roughly 3 times what the U.S. collects in a year in taxes. So clearly, we have no ability to pay the debt that matures. So the idea, of course, is that we're not going to have to pay it back because we're just going to be able to borrow the money to pay it back. But what if we can't? What if our creditors decide that they don't want to roll over that short-term paper? The only way that we can encourage them to do so is by offering a higher rate, which, of course, would crush the U.S. economy. So what I think would happen is rather than letting rates go up dramatically, the Federal Reserve would simply have to monetize a lot of that debt, which is massive inflation.
Oh, okay. My second question is high-frequency trading. Now, Warren Buffett was on earlier talking about, Mark Cuban was on earlier talking about high-frequency trading. Now, do you think ultimately, even with high-frequency trading, that no matter what the fundamentals will always play out, no matter how many times things are being traded and sold short and whatnot, that throughout the long term that the right price will always be discovered, if you will?
Eventually. But, I think that it's a lot of scapegoating when the politicians want to blame our problems on the volatility created by short sellers or high-frequency traders or and any of these trading techniques, computer trading, quantitative trading. That's not the problem. And, in fact, liquidity is not a problem. If we get more people trading, we get more liquidity. I mean, that's good in the stock market. You want liquidity. You want more players involved. I think the problem is the leverage, and the leverage is a function of the low interest rate. So I think there's too much leverage in the market because there's too much government involvement in keeping interest rates down. And I think another problem is the government backstops of the banking system through too big to fail and through other government guarantees that lead to more risk-taking than the market would allow, the free market. Anyway, I don't know if you have more to that question. You want to stick around? We will be back. We're taking more calls here on the Peter Schiff Show on Schiff Radio. Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com, and we are talking to Herman in Queens, New York, who is still on hold. I think Herman had a follow-up question. Go ahead.
Yeah, my last question is something I've never heard libertarians talk about, and I wanted you to comment on that. And that's marriage and divorce in terms of, do libertarians believe that the government, whether it's local, whoever, has a right to take from a husband, even though he was providing for his wife at one time? Do libertarians believe that the government should take from a husband and give a wife a certain lifestyle that she was, quote-unquote, used to? That's my last question. Thank you.
Well, first of all of these cases are decided locally. So the federal government right now is not involved in the dissolution of a marriage as to the assets and the income and all that. It's handled on a local level. And I believe that most states have gone too far with respect to the way they ultimately dissolve a marriage. I mean, some states you have a community property, some states you have equitable ownership. But from the way the laws are now, and of course a lot of people have to address this now with a premarital agreement to set aside the way the case law has evolved over the years. I don't think, look, marriage is a legal agreement that you enter into. So from a libertarian perspective, if you don't want that legal agreement, don't get married. I mean, you can have, you don't have to get married, although in some states you have a palimony, right? In California or certain states, if a man and a woman cohabitate for a long enough period of time, there is a financial obligation imposed there. So I think it's clear now that people, before they get into these types of relationships, need to spell it out for themselves beforehand, what the rules are. Otherwise, it's going to be decided for you by a court. The libertarians, I don't know if it's a libertarian versus conservative issue or not, but personally, I do think that they have gone overboard, which is why, in my own personal affairs, I would enter into an agreement prior to marriage to spell out exactly what the terms financially are going to be if the marriage unfortunately ends in divorce. Because otherwise, if you don't do that, part of the thing that I thought was the most that I didn't like the most about the laws is that if two people are married, and if one person spends their time, let's say, building up a business, and the other person spends their time, just enjoying the income that's generated from all that work, the court looks at the time of the earning spouse, and it doesn't matter whether the spouse that earns the money is a man or a woman. More often than not, it's the man, but sometimes it's the woman. But the court says that if you spend your time building up a business, that half of that time belongs to your spouse, and that therefore your spouse is entitled to half of whatever you created with that time. And I just find that to be repulsive, to say that somebody owns my time, and that if somebody spends their time lying on the beach and shopping, and somebody else spends all their time in an office working, that somehow the person that was on the beach and shopping is entitled to half of whatever value was created by the other spouse who didn't have all that enjoyment out of that time. I just think that that's wrong. But I clearly understand that there is an obligation in a marriage to support the non-income spouse, particularly if you have a situation where a spouse maybe let's say the classic example is you have a doctor and he's married and his wife works and helps put him through medical school, and then he graduates, she stops working, she raises the kids, stays at home, he goes out and makes a lot of money, and then falls in love with his nurse and wants to divorce her. Obviously, the wife put in a lot of time into the relationship. The wife sacrifice enabled the husband doctor to earn a lot of money. That's one thing. But if you have a situation where a successful man comes in, already successful, marries a woman, during the course of the marriage, offers his spouse a very gracious lifestyle, the spouse makes no sacrifices whatsoever, she just enjoys a lifestyle for a number of years, to say that that particular spouse has an obligation to continue to support her in that lifestyle, I think that's wrong. But of course, you can address that now. Anybody who gets married at this point, if you have a very wealthy individual, man or woman, who married somebody of more modest means, if they don't protect themselves at this point, you could say they deserve what they get, because obviously it's clear what's going to happen. And all you have to do is spell it out in a contract. But you got to make sure it's good, because obviously there's a lot of lawyers out there looking to poke holes in these agreements. And they often are able to do that. But anyway, let me go on to another topic, or pick up another phone call, rather. Next up is John calling from San Diego. John, welcome to the show.
Yeah, hi, Peter. Thanks a lot.
Sure.
I want to thank you for being a rational voice in the economy. It's really frightening, the answers we get when you try to ask a decent question in economics.
Yeah.
And I did read your recent book on how an economy grows, and I've given it to my son. Direct question here right now is, I think it wasn't so long ago that I heard you say something to this effect, that Greece would be a lot better off if they tried to preserve, they'd be able to preserve the benefits of their civilized economy if they did everything they could to preserve their relationship with the euro, that if they abandon the euro, go to some new currency, drachma, whatever you would call it, that failure, what they would wind up with would be they wouldn't be limited by their ability to borrow. They would be only limited by their ability to print. And this would drive their currency into
I believe that Greece would be in much worse shape if they left the euro and were free to print as many drachma as they wanted. That is not going to be a positive for the Greek standard of living. I think the best thing that would happen to Greece is that they stay in the Eurozone and default, wreck their credit rating, so they can't borrow any money because nobody will lend to them, and they can't print any money. And if they can't borrow and they can't print, then the only choice they have is to cut government spending. That would be the greatest thing that could happen to Greece. But if they leave the Eurozone, then they can print all the drachma they want and destroy their currency and their economy. If they stay in the Eurozone and are bailed out, then that is not as good. It's probably, maybe it's better than leaving totally because they still have a subsidy from the rest of Europe. So if they stay in Greece with a bailout, the government doesn't have to make the substantive cuts that it might have had to make had they had no bailout, but they'll probably make more cuts than they would make if they simply were to leave the Eurozone entirely. Although if they leave the Eurozone entirely, they can wipe out all of their debt. By staying in the Eurozone, they're still going to have to pay some of their debt. But how much remains to be seen, because I still think that there's going to be bigger than a 50% haircut. I don't think they're going to be in the barbershop many, many times, and by the time it's all over, they're going to have a crew cut. You know, the bondholders are going to feel like they just enlisted in the Marines because there's not going to be much hair left.
Yeah. Well, so you confirmed that's the notion I got from you, and it wasn't somebody else. And what I was thinking about was the implications for the U.S. economy. I mean, we just got off the phone with Howard, who brought up the issue of rolling over our debt, and you mentioned that there was a lot of that debt being rolled over in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, I think perversely, whatever is good for Europe is bad for America in the short run, and whatever is bad for Europe is good for the U.S., because anything that gets people worried about the euro creates demand for the dollar. Even though I think that you're jumping from the frying pan into the fire, that's my perception. I'm still in the minority. You still have a lot of people out there thinking the dollar is a safe haven. And so as long as they feel they need a safe haven, they're going to buy the dollar. If the euro begins to rise, if people are confident that there's been a positive resolution to the Eurozone crisis, then there is less demand for a safe haven, which means there's less demand for dollars, which means the price of the dollar goes down, and that means inflation is higher in the United States, interest rates are higher, and so we have a bigger short-term economic problem. Long-term, it's a different story. But short-run, we need all this worry and all this uncertainty all around the world because we're the ones that benefit from it, in quotes. And very few politicians or people on Wall Street really seem to appreciate this. And even those that appreciate it don't seem to articulate it.
Yeah, I guess my thought is that we benefit from it as long as we're in the frying pan. But how long is it going to be until we get into the fire?
Well, I think we're already there. People just don't realize it, But I think that we're going to have our crisis coming up. But I think it's going to happen after there's some kind of resolution to the European situation. I could be wrong on that. I mean, but that's what I feel. But either way, we're not going to escape our day of reckoning. It's not just the Greeks and the Italians that are going to have to deal with the fact that they've borrowed too much money. We've borrowed too much money, and we got to deal with that as well. We might be able to deal with it later, but we're still going to deal with it. Just like, when the mortgage crisis started, it started in subprime. It didn't exempt the people who had prime mortgages. The prime mortgages, there was the same problems there. It just was a question of which were the weaker links, where did the symptoms surface first. They surface first in subprime, and that is where the sovereign credit crisis is first surfacing in these smaller economies that don't have reserve currencies. But anyway, hey, thank you for the call. We've got another segment coming up before our guest. I'll try to take the remaining callers. We'll still have quite a few people on hold, but I should be able to get to you in the next segment. So stick around. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show on Schiff Radio. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. We are taking calls live, 855-4-SCHIFF, 855-4-SCHIFF. The other side of this break, we have a guest from the Christmas tree industry to discuss the recent Christmas tree tax proposal. Anyway, we are going to continue to take your calls. On hold now is Andrew calling from Fort Lauderdale. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning.
Morning.
My question in regards to prudent, the definition of prudent and investing with nonprofits. A lot of these nonprofits, the consultants still recommend, a lot of U.S. debt, a lot of U.S. Corporate bonds, and they probably have more financials than they do precious metals in their portfolios. Do you think that looking back years from now, that there could be lawsuits, for some of these consultants not seeing this coming?
No, I don't think so, because I think they're pretty much going to be protected by that prudent man rule, which basically says that nobody could have seen it coming, that it would have been crazy for them to buy gold, or it would have been crazy for them to be worried about U.S. Treasuries. So I don't think that anyone is going to get sued for having too much Treasuries. And that's part of the problem. People are afraid for being sued for having too much gold. Because gold, you can make an easier argument before a U.S. jury that why would you own gold? I mean, after all, everybody knows gold is just a metal. It's a barbaric relic. We all know that the U.S. Treasury is the safest thing you can buy. So, what everybody knows is generally not true, but it is a strategy that does well in a court. So that is the unfortunate problem. And so a lot of people who are going to just lose a lot of money. Look, we met with a lot of institutions I did during the week, and many of them had no exposure to gold or gold stocks in the hundreds of billions of dollars they managed, yet owned gold and gold stocks in their personal accounts. And that's a big part of the problem, that they're afraid to do for their clients what they do for themselves because it's not what's considered prudent, or it's not what their clients, quote unquote, want. So I believe a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money based on the fact that their money is being invested in a way that is considered to be responsible. And a lot of this is the fault of government regulations, of course, because the governments decide what's conservative and what's speculative. And so if you do what the government says you should, and then everybody loses a bunch of money, it's not your fault, right? I mean, because bad investment advice is not, you could be wrong, right? It's not an actionable event to be wrong, right? But if you're not responsible, if you're reckless, well, then potentially you can be liable. So then the question is, what is irresponsible? What is reckless? What is imprudent behavior? Right? Because if you behave prudently, if you dot all your I's and you cross all your T's, and then your clients lose all their money, well, it's not like you can be held liable for that. But the question is, what are the I's that need to be dotted? What are the T's that need to be crossed? And the government can say, these are them. And if one of the I's that you dot is, I got all this money in U.S. Treasuries, okay, well, you could check that box off. I mean, that's the safe thing. You told your people to put money in Treasuries. Now, I suppose that you could make an argument that if you put somebody 100% in Treasuries, if that's all they owned, and depending on their age, I mean, clearly if they were like 80, then you're probably home free with that portfolio. But if somebody is, let's say, 45 and you controlled all their money, you put it all in Treasuries, and there was massive inflation, I suppose that somebody could say that that was irresponsible, to have no equities whatsoever, to have nothing, in the stock market. You might be, but it's much easier when somebody has too much in the stock market for someone to come in and say the portfolio was too risky, because ultimately you don't have any losses. I mean, if the Treasury doesn't default and you actually haven't lost money in nominal terms, you've just lost due to inflation, it's pretty hard to file a suit based on that.
Okay, yeah, no.
Yeah, but it is very easy. It is very easy in this country to sue money if you lose in the stock market. I mean, you could lose anything in the stock market and file a lawsuit. That's part of the problem.
Yeah, no, I thought maybe it'd be like almost, like you were mentioning, now everyone saw the housing bubble, and, at the time no one really saw it coming. So people are going to look back at this and, the debt downgrade and, $15 trillion in debt and $60 trillion in Social Security and Medicare liabilities, and think you're crazy for buying anything dollar denominated. But right now, everyone's just sort of, just buying it anyway, not really thinking. But no, I know what you mean.
That's how it's going to be. Look, I think after it hits the fan, it's going to be obvious to all the people who are oblivious to it now, just like in the housing bubble. Anyway, thanks for your call. Next up, Jeremy calling from Montreal. Have you been by our Montreal office yet?
No, I'm planning to soon.
Yeah, we do. That's the latest, the newest office from Europe, Canada, up in Montreal. I was there myself. I don't know. I guess it was about a month ago. I came home with a couple of bags of bagels too. So I was told I had to get those Montreal bagels. Huh?
My first question is, what do you see in the future of housing markets like Palo Alto or New York City, which are generally like blue chip markets? Hello?
Well, I think New York City, and Palo Alto for that matter, I think are going to come down in real terms for sure. I think priced in gold, you'll be able to buy a much nicer apartment in either of those cities or a home in Palo Alto, if in the future than you can today. And now, even in nominal terms, I would expect. Look, we're getting a lot of layoffs now on Wall Street. You got a lot of people laid off from MF Global. I think bonuses I'm hearing are down 20 to 30% this year. Wall Street pays all its bonuses Christmas time, so a lot of the bonuses are going to be quite a bit lower than last year. Maybe some more layoffs are coming. Maybe that will be a negative for the apartment market here in the Manhattan area. But I think prices are still coming down. I think you're not going to bottom out in real estate prices until we have a big run up in interest rates. And then when interest rates finally move up, then you get a bottom in the price, because home prices go the opposite of interest rates. So as it becomes more expensive to buy homes, the price comes down. When it's cheaper to buy homes, the price can be higher. The only thing that might stop that would be if you have a increase in interest rates only because of massive runaway inflation, in which case nominal prices might not come down very much, but real prices would plunge even more under that scenario.
I see. My other question is, are you bullish on Switzerland for the future?
For the long term, yes. I do believe that the Swiss are making some mistakes with respect to how they're handling their monetary policy, given the weakness in the euro. So I think the Swiss have made mistakes, and they have undermined the short-term value of their currency. The Swiss citizens will pay the price, because of diminished purchasing power. But ultimately, I think that the Swiss, just like the Chinese or the Japanese, who are doing the same thing for a long time, I think they will see the error of their ways and reverse course. And so long-term, I am still bullish on the Swiss franc and Switzerland. Anyway, thank you for the call week. We've got a break coming up. We're going to be back for the second hour of the Peter Schiff Show with Betty Malone will be the guest to talk about the Christmas tree tax. So stick around. It'll be an interesting discussion here on the Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com.
Your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome, everybody. This is Peter Schiff. Hour 2 of the Peter Schiff Show is underway now. On the line is Betty Malone, who is a longtime Christmas tree wholesaler. She's been in the business since 1972. She's been working with her husband. She's also a member of the National Christmas Tree Association. She's a graduate of the University of Oregon back in 1972. Betty, welcome to the Peter Schiff Show.
Thank you very much.
So we brought you on to discuss the controversy regarding this Christmas tree tax that was proposed, and then, of course, Barack Obama became the president who stole Christmas, I guess portrayed as the Grinch, trying to put a tax on Christmas trees. Anyway, I think the tax was pulled. What was it about? Was it about 15 cents a tree? Is that what the tax was?
Well, first, Mr. Schiff, it's not a tax. It's an assessment that we growers have decided to assess ourselves so that we can help our industry combat the fake trees coming in from China.
But let me. Was it a unanimous? Is it a unanimous vote, or are there people? Does everybody? If I grow Christmas trees, do I have to pay the assessment? Do I have a choice?
There are several choices. One is if you're growing if you're harvesting every year, if you harvest less than 500 trees a year, or you import less than 500 trees a year, you're not subject to the assessment.
But if I harvest more than 500 trees, I have to pay the assessment whether I want to or not?
You do. In these first 3 years, there's a method, if we are allowed to go forward, there's a method that you can apply for a refund. And then after the referendum, if the referendum passes, then you don't get your money back. But if the referendum fails, then those who applied for their money back get their money back.
Right. So, but it's a pretty complicated process. Meanwhile, you got to pay the assessment. Now, in order for you, now, is this on the wholesale level or on the retail level? Where is the assessment put?
The assessments for who cuts the tree. That's where the assessment takes place.
So whoever cuts it. So if I'm selling Christmas trees on my property and I grow them and cut them down and sell them, then I am going to be subject to the assessment.
Yeah, that's correct. And you mentioned that is this a universally beloved concept or program? Well, it isn't. And in our country we have majority rule, and that's in terms of the number of people that are for it or against it. We had 565 comments posted during the comment period, and 70% of the growers posting were in favor of this, and 90% of the state and multi-state associations were in favor of this.
So it's the Department of is the Department of Agriculture that is leveling the assessment? Is that where it's coming from?
I don't think I would put it quite that way. It's the growers leveling an assessment on themselves. The vehicle that we use to keep ourselves true to the intent of Congress is the USDA. So the assessment is not paid into the government. The government never touches the money.
But if I want to grow Christmas trees in America, if I have some property and I want to grow Christmas trees, am I required to be a member of this association? Does the government require me to join this association?
Well, this isn't an association. This is a commodity program. It's not an association where you pay dues.
Right, but what you're saying, and the mechanism for enforcement is the government, right? The government is enforcing this assessment, right? The 15 cents per tree.
Well, the government only gets involved is if a producer chooses not to pay.
All right. So in other words, then it's a tax. I mean, if you want to, you can dress it up in a ribbon and say it's not really a tax because we're using the money to promote our own industry, but still, it's the government is helping to take money from somebody who might not otherwise want to pay. So this is not the market. This is government. If there was a voluntary association of Christmas tree producers and they all got together voluntarily and decided to have this assessment, then I would say you're correct. But if you're saying that people who are doing nothing other than growing Christmas trees have to pay it whether they want to or not, and if it's being enforced by the government, I would say it's a tax, even if the tax is going to benefit the growers themselves. But, of course, there might be some growers that feel that they're not going to benefit from the tax. I mean, maybe it benefits large Christmas tree growers at the expense of the smaller ones. I don't know. But the question is, why is the government even involved? I mean, what difference does it make? Why should the government get involved in marketing Christmas trees?
Well, the government isn't involved in the marketing. The government's only involved in making sure that the checkoff board, and there's 20 of these national ones. There's hundreds of state and regional ones. In the national ones, the government's just there to make sure, one, that you can't do just exactly what you said, that you can't benefit the large growers at the expense of the small, or the small growers at the expense of the large, or, we can't benefit just the Christmas tree growers in Oregon at the expense of those in New York, Pennsylvania. I mean, there's 47 states that are producing commercial quantities of Christmas trees. What the USDA does is to oversee. You design your program.
But why? Why should the government oversee it at all? What difference does it make? I mean, let people grow Christmas trees and sell them. Why should the Department of Agriculture have anything to do with it? Why is that something that the government should get involved in? Why can't the marketplace regulate Christmas trees just like any other product?
Well, every other product has the opportunity to promote themselves, and in our industry, we have quite a flood of plastic, non-recyclable trees coming into our country from China. What we're trying to do here is to promote a U.S. made and grown product. We're trying to promote U.S. jobs.
I'm not against the growers promoting it themselves, but why do you have to use the Department of Agriculture? Why do you have to force other Christmas tree growers who may not want to be involved in the promotion? Why should the government force them to? Let the market do it. I mean, this is, even the separation of the church and state. I don't think people would like it if they were promoting menorahs or dreidels. I mean, this is something to help Christians celebrate Christmas. Why should the U.S. government get involved in that? Anyway, you're going to have to answer that question when we get back. We got a commercial break. We'll be back. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show here at SchiffRadio.com. Here at SchiffRadio.com, talking with Betty Malone, who is representing the Christmas tree growers in support of a plan to promote a Christmas tree sales, live trees, through a 15-cent per tree assessment. Whether or not it's a tax or an assessment, that is part of the debate. But Betty, I'm pretty consistent. I'm not just picking on the Christmas trees. I would have been against, and I am against, similar programs for farmers with respect to the Got Milk campaign or, pork, the other white meat. If industries want to spend their own money without government involvement, so be it. But I don't think the government should be involved. Certainly, maybe you can argue that everybody drinks milk or eats pork, although, maybe some Jews don't eat pork, just like a lot of Jews don't buy Christmas trees. But why should the government get involved in the marketing of religious symbolic product and bring the federal government involved in that?
Well, a couple of things, Mr. Schiff. First, there is no government entity involved in terms of where the money goes. The money goes to the board, if there's a board formed, and they decide how the money is spent. The other thing is, this is an agricultural product, and even though you and I may not agree on how we'd like to have this done, it is the law of the land. These are legal groups. There's precedent in law. There was a Supreme Court ruling in 2005 that said these are legal. Now, if you don't like them, I mean, and there are people who don't, and that will work to change that law. But right now, they're the law of the land, and they are for agricultural
Well, I'm not saying I don't like Christmas trees. I mean, or I have anything against them. My point is, why does the government have to get involved in the process of growing or marketing Christmas trees? And if the government is going to be involved, maybe it should just be a local government for if there's any safety issues concerned with fire hazards or something like that. But why you bring in the federal government? And the point is, it's not federal money, but you're relying on the federal government to enforce the assessment. And I understand your concern. You're worried about free riders. You're worried about, hey, we're going to spend money on advertising, and some people won't want to spend it, but they'll still get the benefit. I understand that, but that's a problem that the industry should have to deal with without turning to the government to use the point of a gun to force people to pay an assessment that they might not want to pay.
Well, that's not the point of a gun.
Well, what is it then?
Well,
the government can if I'm a Christmas tree grower and I don't want to pay this assessment and I grow 1,000 trees a year, what's the government going to do to me if I refuse to pay it?
Well, first of all, the government's not going to do anything, not until the checkoff board has gone through all the procedures that it has to enforce collection.
Okay, so they go through all the procedures and I didn't pay. But so they go through all the checkoff procedures. I sold a couple of thousand Christmas trees, and I didn't pay any of this assessment. What happens to me?
Well, from what I've read in other commodities that have faced this, is you go to court. The court decides that, you know what, this is the law of the land, that these programs are legal, and you didn't pay. And the court will make a decision on what happens to that grower.
Yeah, well, but then that's where I'm talking about the point of a gun. I mean, it's figurative, but the government is forcing me to do something.
But Mr. Schiff, in these days, this day and age, we have to be really careful about how we talk. And the point of a gun, I mean, that's scary, and I know.
Well, ultimately, if I don't pay the tax, they're going to put me in jail, and if I don't want to go to jail and I run away, they're going to shoot me. I mean, that's so ultimately the government has force.
Nobody's going to shoot you over not paying an assessment. Come on.
Well, but ultimately, that's what happens. What if I refuse to pay? Then they're going to try to take my money. What if I defend my money with ultimately, that's what it boils down to.
Do you refuse to pay your income tax?
But this is different. This is the government getting involved in marketing Christmas trees.
They're not involved in the marketing at all. The marketing takes place from a commodity board. A commodity board decides what kind of program they'd like to put together. They either create the program themselves or they hire somebody.
But they're involved in the funding. They're forcing people to be involved. They're bringing the power of the U.S. government and the judicial system to force some small independent growers who might not want to pay this assessment. They're being forced to do it. And that's not right. I mean, the government should. This is one particular group of people. Obviously, there's going to be some Christmas tree producers that think this is a good idea. So somebody is obviously benefiting from it. But there are some people that are opposed to it and don't want to do it. And the government is coming in and forcing them. I think the government shouldn't have any business getting involved in this industry any more than I think it should be involved in a lot of other industries. You're right. There are a lot of things that are being done that I think shouldn't be done. But I don't believe that 2 wrongs or 3 wrongs or 100 wrongs make a right. Just because the government is doing something wrong someplace else doesn't mean we should justify it for Christmas trees.
Well, part of the deal is that these programs do exist. They are legal. It is the law of the land. This is a way that commodity groups have found really successful. The economic studies have repeatedly found that the return on a farmer's investment in a checkoff program is incredibly high, and that's the reason that these are popular with the overwhelming majority of the farmers.
But then why do you need the government?
Majority rule.
But then why does the government have to get involved? Why can't you just do it without the government? And if people don't want to participate, they don't participate.
Well, it's just what you mentioned before. When we investigated this with, particularly with a half a dozen other commodities, they all said, we've tried over and over again voluntary programs, just like you mentioned. They're at the it's the people who pay into it who it's not economic for them to keep having their product cost more because they paid into a promotion product program that benefited the entire industry. And we know from our experience in our own industry, voluntary programs, they actually work in terms of increasing interest and demand for our agricultural product. But they have a life, and it's about 3 years. So you get a group of people that see the need, see what's going on in the marketplace, put in their time, put in their effort.
Mm-hmm. I understand. I understand your perspective. I know, though, from if businesses want to collude about a lot of things, if businesses get together and say, hey, you know what? Why are we competing with one another? Why don't we cooperate and why don't we fix prices and we'll all make more money? The government comes in and prosecutes you and says, well, that's violating antitrust. But this is the same principle. You're trying to get government to come in and force the industry or allow the industry to do something through regulation that it couldn't do in a free market.
Well, you know what? The dollars don't go to any government entity. The dollars.
Oh, I agree.
Commodity board. So it has nothing to do. It's not a tax, and it's the industry pulling itself up by its bootstraps. And even if you don't like the law of the land, this is the law of the land. These are legal programs. It has. Well,
I agree. I don't like the law. That's my point. I don't think the government should be involved. I understand what the industry is trying to do, and maybe this actually helps. I'm sure that the Got Milk campaign helped the dairy industry. I'm not saying that it doesn't work. I'm just saying I object to the government involvement.
we found when we talked to the watermelon industry were able to take some of their checkoff dollars and do things like the research to get a really good tasting watermelon that didn't have seeds. That was the problem they had. You know,
we were running out of time. Look, I appreciate you coming on your show. I understand your perspective, but I'm just consistent. I don't want the government involved. I want the industries to figure out how to market their products without bringing in the government to force their members to pay assessments that they might otherwise not want to pay. Anyway, that's it for today. For this segment. We'll be back. We got a lot more of the Peter Schiff Show coming up here on SchiffRadio.com. Schiff back at SchiffRadio.com. We've got open lines, 8554-SCHIFF, 8554-SCHIFF. On that, just one more word on this, the Christmas tree tax. First of all, President Obama, very disingenuous to quickly drop that particular tax. This obviously, look, it's not a tax on Christmas trees. It's marketing expenses. It's obviously the Christmas tree growers are collectivizing some of their marketing, and maybe some money they would have spent individually on ads, they're going to spend collectively, and they're going to collect the money through this tax. The reason they're doing it this way, we mentioned, is to avoid the free rider problem. They know if they're going to run a national campaign to buy fresh-cut Christmas trees, that it potentially will benefit all growers whether or not they contribute. And so rather than making those contributions voluntary, they want to make them mandatory through a government enforcement mechanism. That is where I've got the problem with the government enforcement mechanism. I don't think the government should go on and help industries cartelize or collectivize their ad campaigns, even if they benefit those industries. And, of course, there's going to be some individual growers, smaller growers, that feel that they're not going to benefit from this national ad campaign by the full cost of what their assessment is going to be. Why should they be required to participate? The thing is, we've got to get the government out of all of this. And she's correct that, this may be the law, but, unfortunately, I think it's not the law of the land. The Constitution is the law of the land. And I think all this stuff is unconstitutional. I think that is the law of the land that we need to respect. We got to get the government out of all this. One of the departments I would like to eliminate is the Department of Agriculture, too. Even though the Department of Agriculture has actually been around for a long time. It's one of these departments. It might have been one of the original departments. There weren't that many. I think there were maybe 4 or 5 original departments. I forget what they were. There was the War Department, which eventually became Defense, and now was Defense and Homeland Security. But I know there was the Treasury. I don't even think there was Commerce. I know there was a State Department. I'm pretty sure. Got to find out what the original 5 cabinet level. I'm sure the Interior. Although I don't know. I'm going to over the break. Let me look at what the original ones. But the Department of Agriculture has been around for a long time. I don't think it was there from the start, but it was enacted a long time ago. But I would like to get rid of it because mainly the main thing that the Department of Agriculture does is run these giant price support programs, subsidizing farmers, paying farmers not to grow this or not to grow that, or trying to micromanage the agriculture industry. How much soybeans do we get? How much corn do we bet? How much wheat? The government needs to get out of it. We have an efficient market in farming in this country. It could be a lot more efficient. The argument goes that, we need all this special protection for farmers because farming is inherently very risky. There could be bad weather, and that somehow because farming is riskier than other businesses, that the government should get involved. That is all complete nonsense. Look, all businesses are risky. Farming is probably less risky than a lot of other businesses. Think about a restaurant. How many restaurants fail? Opening up a restaurant is pretty risky, right? A restaurant, who knows? A lot of them fail. People, they don't catch on. So should the government come in with a Department of Restaurants to make sure that anybody who decides they want to open up a restaurant is protected in case, they have a bad chef or they get a bad review and people don't go to their restaurants? Look, all businesses are inherently risky. Farming isn't any riskier or safer than anything else. Yeah, the weather's involved, but the weather's involved in a lot of things. What if I run an amusement park? What if I have a restaurant in a vacation destination? What if I'm on a ski resort and they don't have a lot of snow? What happens there? I mean, that's weather related. I mean, so should the government get involved in all the ski resorts, the federal government, because running a ski resort is risky because you don't know about the weather? Look, the whole thing is ridiculous. We got to get the government out of as many industries as possible, particularly agriculture. And again, are Christmas trees agriculture? Well, I guess because you grow it, but you don't eat it. I mean, does it make it? I mean, it's not like sometimes they try to say, well, we have to have these agricultural programs because food is really important, because everybody eats food and we need to have a good food supply. And of course, we would have a good food supply without the government involvement. But can you really make that argument with Christmas trees? I mean, do you really need the government to make sure that we have a Christmas tree industry? Now, apparently, too, one of the points that she made is that, well, what about competition from imported fake Christmas trees? Well, what about it? I mean, if people want fake Christmas trees, why can't they? I mean, she tried to make the point that it was, bad for the environment or something. Well, how? I mean, a fake Christmas tree, you use the same Christmas tree over and over and over again. That might be better for the environment than the cost of cutting down all these trees. And, of course, most of these Christmas trees that they cut down are planted, so they're not like going into the wilderness and leveling forests. They are harvesting and growing Christmas trees the way they grow corn or wheat. But I'm sure over time, I mean, if someone buys an artificial Christmas tree and they have it in their attic and they use the exact same tree every single year, that, given what about all the gas or all the power that's used to transport and cut down all these Christmas trees? I mean, you might be able to argue that it's more energy efficient. It's got a smaller environmental footprint to reuse these artificial trees. But regardless, it shouldn't be up to the government. If people want to buy artificial trees and they don't want to buy the fresh cut trees, why should the government care? Why should the government even have a role in deciding it? That is exactly what my point was. Anyway, before I go back to the phones, I want to talk a little bit about Warren Buffett. I like to talk about Warren a lot these days because he's out there. Really, I think he is beating the drums for class warfare. And, in fact, he was on CNBC today basically saying that the class warfare that exists today is the rich declaring war on the poor. I mean, the rich aren't taking anything from the poor. I mean, the whole idea that is absolutely nonsense. It's the redistribution in the tax code is going the other way. The taxes that I am paying, right? Not the vast majority of the taxes I'm paying are going to other people. They're going to people that are much poorer than I am, and they're going to transfer payments. There is no class warfare on the war to the rich to the poor because there's no reason for the rich to wage war on the poor. The class warfare has to do with some people trying to take money away from other people. And the rich are not trying to take anything from the poor. It's the poor through the government that are trying to take things from the rich. Now, that doesn't mean that some of the government programs, like cheap money from the Fed that creates inflation, aren't hurting some poor people at the expense of rich people. They are. But that's not part of the class warfare. In fact, most of the governments that are trying to say we got to tax the rich more are responsible for those policies that benefit people who have leveraged up, who have borrowed money to buy real things, and it hurts the people who are living paycheck to paycheck, who have savings and need to use their wages to buy food and energy. They are being hurt by the big welfare programs that are being financed, the social welfare state that is being financed by inflation and by a printing press. But there is no deliberate war through the tax code where upper-income people are trying to get rich by taking money from the poor. In fact, most people who are getting rich are doing it by helping poor and middle-class people to live a better life, by providing goods and services and jobs that disproportionately benefit the poor and the middle class. In fact, the way you get rich in this country is not to figure out what other rich people want. I mean, you get a lot richer by marketing to the middle class. Sam Walton became the wealthiest American, and his children are still among the wealthiest Americans, by selling products to middle-class people. Yes, I guess the guys that own Tiffany's and Saks Fifth Avenue made a lot of money too, but not nearly as much money as Sam Walton because he went after the lower-class customer. And the thing is, there's a lot more of them. And so if you can really find ways to satisfy the demands of the lower class and middle class, you can make a lot more money just figuring out what the ultra-rich want to do with their money. But again, Warren Buffett on television, one of the things he talked about with Becky Quick, and I guess he was on because she just got back from her maternity leave, but one of the things he said is that, well, even if the government raised his taxes, he said, look, I paid $7-8 million in taxes last year, and if the government raised my taxes $3 or $4 million or $5 million, it really wouldn't change much. Well, that's probably true, because the amount of money he pays in taxes at the personal level is trivial. He pays billions of dollars a year through his company, Berkshire Hathaway. That's where the real money is. The only reason that a few $1 million would be trivial to Warren Buffett is because he's earning billions, and he's being taxed on his billions through Berkshire Hathaway. And in fact, when Becky Quick asked him if he thought that corporate tax rates should be raised, he said no. He doesn't want corporate taxes to go up because that's where all his money is. He only wants personal taxes to go up because he doesn't earn any money on the personal level because he chooses to pay himself just $100,000 a year. Now, if Warren Buffett's argument, though, the argument that he is making is that if the rich pay more in taxes, it's not going to hurt the economy. That is pure nonsense. What does Warren Buffett think the rich are doing with the money they don't pay in taxes? He knows they're not spending it on consumer goods. They're investing it. That's how economies grow, because if they grow based on the money we don't spend. But if the government says we're going to take a lot of the money that the rich don't spend, well, then the rich can't invest as much. So you don't have as much economic growth. You don't have as much capital investment. You don't create the products. You don't produce the jobs. That's what happens. I mean, does Warren Buffett really believe that sending money to the government is better than leaving it in the hands of the productive entrepreneurs who earned it? Does he really believe in socialism? If so, then just give the government all the money. If that's the case, just let him take all the money, and we're all going to be better off. Anyway, I've got one bit of sound from Warren Buffett talking about higher tax rates. We're going to have to play that when we get back, and then I'm going to take more of your calls. We have some open lines, 855-4-SCHIFF. We'll answer your calls and talk a little bit more about Warren Buffett when we get back. You're listening to The Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com. This is Peter Schiff with the last segment of the day on The Peter Schiff Show, and I'm going to play this sound from Warren Buffett today on CNBC, where he basically admits, although he doesn't come right out and say it, that higher tax rates aren't even going to affect him because obviously he pays his taxes through capital gains and dividends, and what he doesn't discuss is he pays his taxes as a shareholder of Berkshire Hathaway. But let me play this sound, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. It's cut number 3.
If we were to go to 90% marginal rates on ordinary income, would that change your 17% tax rate that's been so publicized? If just ordinary income went up to 90%, would that change yours at all from 17?
I think it would, but it wouldn't change it dramatically. But I'm not 100%. I'd want to make the calculation. It wouldn't. It certainly, if you left dividends and capital gains at 15%,
then it would.
I don't think it would change it. Now,
Okay.
What would change my rate, and what I advocate, what would change my rate is a minimum rate on incomes of $1 million and over on taxable income, not adjusted gross income, but taxable income.
Yeah, what would change his rate is if he paid himself a salary, which he does not do. But I will explain to you why Warren Buffett chooses not to pay himself a salary, apart from the fact he doesn't want to pay the taxes. Berkshire Hathaway trades at a market multiple of 20 times earnings, and Warren Buffett owns 37% of Berkshire Hathaway. So every dollar that he pays himself in salary reduces the value of Berkshire Hathaway by 20 times that dollar, because it reduces the earnings. And since you have a 20 multiple, by not paying himself a salary, the price of Berkshire Hathaway is a lot higher, the value of Berkshire Hathaway's shares. So if he were to pay himself, let's say, $100 million in salary, the value of Berkshire Hathaway stock would be reduced if he paid himself $100 million in salary a year, he would reduce the value of Berkshire Hathaway stock by $2 billion. Now, and Warren Buffett owns 37% of that, so it would reduce his share by $740 million. So in other words, if Warren Buffett pays himself $100 million in salary, he reduces his net worth by $740 million, which is why he doesn't do it. Now, what Warren Buffett could do is he can go into the market and sell some of his stock and get his income through the sale of appreciated Berkshire Hathaway stock, and then just pay the 15% tax rate on his income because he was able to convert his income to capital gains by selling stock. But this is an action that Warren Buffett chooses. He uses the tax code to his advantage to minimize his taxes. And then he comes out and says, he cries about the fact that he's not paying enough taxes, and his whining about it is being used as an excuse to raise taxes on other people that don't have that choice. I don't have that choice. I don't run a publicly traded company. I got to pay that 35% tax plus the 3% tax plus the state taxes. I don't have the mechanism to avoid it like Warren Buffett does. And since he's using all these loopholes to minimize his taxes, it really annoys me when he cries about the fact that he feels he's being coddled. I mean, one thing I agree with Warren Buffett about is the tax on carried interest. I think that we should treat carried interest the same as all other income, but apart from that, he's doing a disservice. And I think I've spoken too much time because I wanted to get some callers. We'll see if we have time. Jim is on hold from St. Louis. Jim, welcome to the show.
Hey, Peter, how are you?
Good.
Okay, I got a question. You're the 1%. You create jobs. I don't have any problem with that. Matter of fact, if it's your own company, you can make whatever you want, and that's fine. What about these guys that all they've ever done was go to a prep school, go to Harvard, and then they get a job in some bank or they get a job running a corporation? I guess my problem with them is more than anything is those guys. They didn't start that company. All they did was go to work for that company. They go in there and they bash jobs and cut people and create big salaries for themselves, and even when they do a terrible job, they give them $30 million to go out the door, and in case they can't.
Oh, I agree with you that you've got a lot of corporate boards that are approving compensation packages that are terrible. In fact, shareholders should vote with their feet. Yeah, well, those shareholders should vote with their feet. Don't own stock in those companies. I mean, if there's a publicly traded company that is overcompensating their executives, get rid of the shares. Let the market punish them. And ultimately, the market will punish them if this happens. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the government has encouraged, through low interest rates, maybe a lot of people to look to capital gains or through the tax code rather than dividends over time. And so I think a lot of the owners and again, especially since a lot of people own their stocks through mutual funds, I don't think a lot of the owners have been as they haven't overseen the actions of some of their employees. And remember, these executives work for the shareholders. But if you're saying that, look, is it fair that somebody is born to a wealthy family and gets to go to Harvard?
I don't think that it's fair, Peter. I just think it's ridiculous. If you look at, like, we're here in St. Louis, we have the Anheuser-Busch. Okay, the Busch family started the brewery. If they want to rake in X amount of millions of dollars, that's their business. But when some guy that comes in and has done absolutely nothing besides just being in the right place in the right time.
Well, it's hard to say that he's done absolutely nothing. I mean, you have to work hard. It's not like they just hold a lottery to see who's going to run some of these companies. I mean, you actually have to prove to somebody that you could do a good job. You have to have some experience. And look, if you don't do a good job, if you can't create value for your shareholders, you're going to get fired. You don't have these jobs for life. It may appear to it. But look, yes, do some people through circumstances, do they get lucky? Do they catch a break? Of course. But, I mean, hey, that's life. Even President Kennedy said life isn't fair, and it's not. Some people are born very attractive. Some people are born with a lot of talent. Some people are born to wealthy parents. They're a member of the Lucky Sperm Club, so to speak. And so, yes, some people have more breaks than others. That's life. Life isn't fair, and it's not up to the government to make it fair. Anyway, Jack, calling from New Orleans. You got the last word.
Yes, Peter, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I've been reading one of our political enemies, George Soros, been reading The Alchemy of Finance, and it's gotten me a little shaken up because I wasn't aware of how he made his money and his theories prior to reading this. And, of course, I read some of Jim Rogers, who was his partner, who is on our side politically. But, the whole idea of reflexivity, is all to do with booms and busts, and of course it's very concerning to me when it, as it relates to, the dollar, the credit, gold, and so forth.
Yeah.
And,
well, hey, thanks for your comment. Unfortunately, I can't really react to it. We're out of time for today's show. We will be back again tomorrow with another 2 hours of the Peter Schiff Show here at SchiffRadio.com. And I'm going to try to look up the original departments of government going back to the adoption of the Constitution. Anyway, stay tuned for tomorrow's show. This is Peter Schiff on SchiffRadio.com, the gold standard in talk radio.